everyone. So I think we'll get started now. Go ahead and jump in. I'm Jacqueline from Composer, and I'm joined today by Ali Berry, the CEO of Composer, and as well as Clarissa, the Composer intern, and four fantastic panelists from four great organizations. Welcome to Composer's Curriculum Design webinar on overcoming bias for global citizenship. So I will start and kick us off today by explaining Composer's curriculum design framework, if you're not familiar with our product. And then we'll jump into hearing from Nicole, one of our panelists, on creating a string and creating curriculum on Composer. Then we'll hear from our panelists for a discussion, hear from them on their views and their work on overcoming bias. And then we'll leave time at the end for questions and a wrap up. So again, a huge welcome to our panelists. If you just all want to each wave as I introduce you. We're very, very thankful to have you with us today. Thankful for your partnership. We have Clary Von Lee from the Global Oneness Project. And we have Coralie Conway from High Resolves. And we have Nicole Goggin from Global Nomads Group. And then we have Chad Brown from Videos for Change. So thank you all for joining us, and you'll hear from all of them shortly on what they do and why this topic is important to them. So a little bit about Composer, if you're not yet familiar. Composer is a digital platform, and it's a global marketplace for educators to access and design high-impact curriculum and citizenship education. So what is citizenship education? At Composer, we define citizenship education as equipping the next generation to act for the well-being of themselves, their communities, and the planet. And we think of it through four different areas of global competence, social emotional learning, social justice, and civic learning. So our topic today of overcoming bias really straddles both area of global competence and social justice underneath a broader umbrella of citizenship education. So at Composer, we are a marketplace for citizenship education content and curriculum. And we source our content and partner with over 30 fantastic organizations who specialize in one or more of those four areas. And so our panelists today are representatives from four of these organizations, and all of them are really dedicated to supporting educators in helping students become and grow and develop into engaged and thoughtful citizens. And the magic of Composer is both in the access to content in our content library, where you can search for content from these organizations in a variety of different topics, but also in the curriculum design framework and what we call our Create Studio, where you can take content from a variety of these different providers and put them together into a learning journey, or what we call a string. So you can see here an example. This is a string that we will look at together as a group and hear from Nicole and Cora on their process for building this. But they took content from four of our providers and put them together to sequence into larger learning outcomes for students and goals on learning about bias, analyzing it, how it fits into identity, and how to address it in the real world. So a little bit about Composer's curriculum design framework. So at Composer, we support educators in designing content and curriculum for student mastery. And we do this by translating all of our content into a common visual language, where we describe an element or define an element as a single learning experience that can be implemented in 1 to 2 sessions, and a string as a sequence of these elements, or you can think of it as a unit, a curricula, a sequence of learning, a learning journey that incorporates 3 different types of elements. And these 3 different types of elements are represented on our platform by 3 different shapes. And together they create a journey for students that will help them with mastery in a new topic or skill. So the three learning experiences, or three different element types. The first is a peak experience, which we represent by a triangle. And the purpose of a peak experience is to introduce students to new knowledge, demonstrate value, and provide motivation for a new topic or skill. These experiences are usually immersive and effective, memorable, and some examples include workshops, museum visits, and powerful films. The second element type are repeated practices. These are represented by squares on Composer, and they move new knowledge that a student may have learned in a peak experience into a more long-term memory and provide opportunity for a student to practice their new skill or what they learned in the hook and peak experience over time, usually increasing in complexity and difficulty as they go along. And some examples include classroom activities, exercises, and lessons. And then finally, the third element type are real world applications, which are represented by circles on Composer. And they are the culmination of the practice from the repeated practice, usually most challenging of the elements, and are opportunities for students to apply what they've learned inside the classroom to outside of the classroom. So they're usually action-based, oriented towards impact outside of the classroom. Some examples include community projects, service learning, and digital campaigns. So if we take these three element types, these three different parts of the learning journey, and we put them together into what we call a string, we string them together. These are some tips on creating strings, which you can do on Composer. One is to draft learning outcomes first to frame the sequence and focus on larger student learning and goals for the entire holistic string experience together. To start, or at least have in the first third of the string, a peak experience that will introduce a student to new knowledge and provide that sort of hook or aha moment to address motivation. And then have practice elements in the middle that increase in complexity and difficulty. And then finally end with a real world application where a student can put these skills into practice. And if you're wondering, well, how am I going to remember all of these tips? You don't have to. On Composer, we have an interactive Create Studio where you can take the content from all of our different providers in all different areas and content subjects within citizenship education and combine them together however you like into the Create Studio. And as you do so, as you add, take away, change the order of all these different elements, you are guided by our Create Studio with tips that you can see an example here at the top. It says add at least one more element of repeated practice. And then also by this string strength meter on the right-hand side that will give you feedback on how strong the string is in terms of it being an impactful and powerful learning journey for students to accomplish mastery of a new topic or skill. So with that, a little bit about Composer, I will now turn over to our panelists. I'll give you each a few minutes to tell us a little bit about your organization, what you do, what the topic of overcoming bias means to you and for your work. So we'll start with Clary from the Global Oneness Project.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jacqueline, for that. And I hope this finds all of you well as you prepare, and at least in North America, getting ready back to school and what that means to you. So I'm Clary Von Lee, the Executive Director of the Global Oneness Project. And we are a nonprofit organization and a multimedia platform. And we provide free stories and curricula for K-12 to university classrooms for meaningful inquiry and learning about our world. So we believe that stories are very essential for to empower and inspire students. We have a rich library of stories on our platform, and all of them are either a short documentary film, a photo essay, or an essay. And they all explore very complex issues like climate change, migration, social justice, and sustainability. Um, Combined with learning activities, we aim to foster empathy, resilience, and a sacred relationship to our planet. So I was thinking about bias and global citizenship, and some of the questions that we ask ourselves is, how can we kind of bear witness to our world through stories? How might that simple act of bearing witness kind of provide powerful opportunities to reflect on our own experiences, but also on others' experiences? So as many of our stories take place all around the world. And so we aim to put these stories, these stories document people, individuals, and communities. And so we aim to put those places on the map for students to learn about these global issues through humanistic lens. And so teachers are using our resources to prepare students to become perceptive and engaging global citizens. I look forward to sharing more later.
Thank you so much, Clary. Love your work, and thank you for that great intro. So now we will hear from Coralie Conway at High Resolves.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here this evening and talking about curriculum, especially in the time that we're in. Just so excited to kind of get back into the back to school spirit and actually be excited about it and looking forward to it. My name is Coralie, and I go by she or they pronouns. I am coming to you this evening from Hamilton, Ontario, just an hour outside of Toronto, Canada, the land of the Haudenosaunee, Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat peoples. And the work that I do with High Resolves in Canada really allows me to tap into our North American team. So I'm situated on a team that is headquartered in New Orleans, but we do work all over Canada and the US. And our focus, our mission statement at High Resolves is supporting young people in gaining the capacity, the desire, the skill set, 21st century skill set to understand the ways in which they can make a positive impact on the world around them. We really introduce mastery at High Resolves in the same way that Composer does, by introducing and offering elements to educators and young folks around peak experiences, that repeated practice, which I think, as it relates to us learning how to be humans in this world and navigating this world, it's really about practice. And so that repeated practice piece is of critical importance, and we support educators in bringing that repeated practice into their classroom and incorporating it into subjects from language arts to science. It's all related. And lastly, that real world application piece is something that allows students to see the ways in which these learnings are applicable in the world around them. And so it definitely is rooted within their communities, within their spheres of influence, from their personal friendships to their neighborhoods. And so we are really excited to connect with fellow providers within the ecosystem to talk about the ways that our collaborative efforts can support young people and educators in doing this kind of work, in building these kind of capacities, and understanding that seeing ourselves and seeing others is a big part of that first step in overcoming bias. In a few weeks, I'll be doing a workshop with a local independent school and some student leaders who are focusing on overcoming bias as it relates to their student leadership. And so I'm looking to gain some tips this evening that I can pass along to future leaders in the work that they're doing as well. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Cora. That was a wonderful overview. Thank you for sharing. And now we'll move on to Nicole Goggin from Global Nomads Group.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jacqueline. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole. I am based here in Savannah, Georgia. Our team at Global Nomads Group is pretty remote. We have team members on the East Coast and the West Coast of the United States, in the UK, and is in Amman, Jordan. Global Nomads Group is a nonprofit that creates engaging educational programs that connect youth with their peers from around the world to learn about a real world topic and build empathy, global awareness, and action orientation. Our Student to World program is an online course offered in 2 different formats, a full modular course and a condensed video-based course, and 8 different topics. Our programs are truly for youth by youth. Each year, we engage a global group of high school students who are led by G&G trained college-age youth in a robust curriculum design internship. Working together on cross-regional teams, they choose the new Student to World topics, use backwards mapping to design the curricular content, create videos, and contribute their own stories. Then our team arranges it all into the 2 online course formats for students ages 12 to 19 to dive into, either as a personalized learning experience or facilitated by their teacher. As students progress through the course, they engage with stories created by their global peers and contribute their own stories, further adding to the global peer repository for other youth to learn from. And overcoming bias is an incredibly important topic for us at G&G, and we're so happy that our youth interns chose that topic and designed videos and curated content for it. We really at G&G want each and every youth to know that they are seen, heard, and that their identity is honored. So understanding the concept of bias, knowing strategies to unlearn it and interrupt it in themselves and others can only help create a more just society.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nicole. So well said. And finally, we'll go to Chad from Videos for Change.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Jacqueline, and the rest of the panelists. It's so nice to be here. And for us, it's fitting that I'm the last of the panelists to introduce myself, because I am part of the Videos for Change team, and we come at the end of the string of learning. So to hear from the 3 panelists that prepare some of the lessons, whether they be peak experiences or repeated practice sessions that lead up to the work that we do at Videos for Change, is really great. So what we do is we give students the opportunity to make 1-minute videos about social issues that they are passionate about. So once they have had the peak experience, in this case, it might be a peak experience like identity and purpose that Coralie will speak about. They've talked about biased attitudes, how they come to be formed. They've done a bunch of repeated practice sessions with, whether they're through the Global Nomads Group or the Global Oneness Project. They get all of that learning. They're ready to go and do something with that. Videos for Change is their opportunity to go and apply that in the real world, so that those learnings are not just confined to the classroom, that they've got the opportunity to go out and do something with them, and really have that realization that I've got this passion and I want to make a difference and I can actually do something. So they make a video. We then run competitions, both national and global. So we ran a US national competition earlier this year. Our inaugural global competition just finished up a couple of weeks ago, and we're currently in the middle of our Australian national competition, where I am coming at you from. So that gives the students the opportunity, once they've made their videos, to enter it into a competition, have their videos seen by more people, and have that impact sort of amplified across the world, and across their own community, but also around the world, through their own networks and throughout. So I'm super excited to go through the string that Nicole has put together, and then answer any questions that people might have at the end. So thanks very much for having us along.
Thanks so much, Chad, and thank you for the perfect segue into string design. So we are going to hear from Nicole on this wonderful string that she's created for us on Composer, on overcoming bias for global citizenship. So over to you, Nicole.
Awesome, thank you so much. And I do want to add that Coralie definitely helped in creating the string, so thank you so much. And I'm going to ask that she contribute a little bit when we get to a particular element. But just to start off, so this string, I really kept a few things in mind when designing it. The first time So while the string visually looks pretty short, it's actually about 17 class sessions. So the Global Nomads Group element includes a locked sequence, which is multiple sessions. And then the videos for change element is a 7-session challenge. So this leaves still flexibility to schedule the string as an intensive month-long course, or you can spread it out across a semester and kind of choose certain days that you want to focus this content on. It also allows for customization and scaffolding. And I know that's very important to all of you because the concept of bias is such a large topic, and you'll likely want to curate your conversation and curriculum and lesson plan based on your school and community's experience with bias. Next, I also wanted to make sure that the string was diverse in terms of the different elements we included, and composer's string meter had rated me high, so I thought that was good. It was very strong. So each element type is incorporated. You have your repeated practice, your peak experience, and real world application. And each really calls on students to engage in various activities. And so then combined in this string, you have students learning by reading, writing, photography, videography, storytelling, making global connections, and taking action. So this allows students of various learner types and levels to engage in the concept and provide space for reach and reteach. And then last is cost. We understand that for many educators, you have limited to non-existent budgets to work with. So having a string that is financially accessible to everyone was very important. All of the elements are free with the exception of the peak experience. However, we do have options to switch that element out for a free peak experience. And when I get into that, Coralie can share a little bit more about the different alternatives. So we start with Global Oneness Project's single session element, a tapestry of multicultural diversity. Here, students view a photo essay and explore different types of diversity by looking at New York City, almost as a mini case study. And I thought starting with this will allow students to think about what diversity looks like in a place that they've most likely heard of, something they might be familiar with, and then take that and consider what it looks like in their own community. Then the next element is a peak experience. This is a workshop by High Resolves titled Talking About Identity and Purpose. So jumping from examining diversity in New York City to then considering what that looks like in their own community, this workshop engages students in building new knowledge, exploring their own individual identity and purpose, how their local and global community has influenced the lens in which they see diversity, and the impact that has on their actions and others. And here we start to explore the concept of bias and the idea that it is learned and not innate. Now, this is a paid workshop. So Cora, if you don't mind talking a little bit about the free alternatives, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. And that was a great description of what this particular peak experience offers. I think it couples really well with that New York case study, going into having students have the opportunity to see it within their own microcosms, within their own classroom, within their own community. Part of the peak experience allows students to assume the identity of others, look at how they form friendships, make groups, and then to delve into the pyramid of hate as a model for looking at the ways in which bias at a very base level can be elevated into some of the most difficult and challenging things that we face as a society. So it really allows students to walk through the implications of what bias leads to if it remains uninterrupted, unchecked. And so it really grounds the experience in this immersive activity for young folks. It's part of our ethos at High Resolves to ensure that our programming is always accessible. So while we have this particular peak experience that allows for a facilitator to come into your classroom and guide your students through this activity, whether or not it's digitally, online, through remote capabilities or it's in person, we have free options as well. We call them freemium resources. And so that's through our Basecamp series that leverages films, documentaries to really highlight some of those key learning outcomes with students as well. And so I think one of the amazing things about the Composer platform is the filtering capability. So you can take a look at a string, and for any element you can filter by grade level, whether it's free or paid, the activity type, to indicate or find other elements that could be good substitutes for what you're looking for. So for this particular peak experience, you can look for a free version of the peak experience. I would suggest something like Isle of Dogs or Remember the Titans. You can take a look to ensure that the grade level works for your group of students, and instructional minutes as well. So there are quite a few options looking at identity, collective identity, purpose as well. That could be a great substitute for talking about identity and really leading into some strong conversations and dialogue around bias as well.
Awesome, thank you so much. So really great options if the paid workshop isn't possible. So then after that, you dive into a repeated practice with Global Nomads Group's Overcoming Bias online course. Here, students learn about different types of bias. They dive into the ladder of inference, which helps them understand how biases are formed, and then bias in the media and their community. And students learn from curated resources and stories that have already been created and shared from their peers from around the world. The program culminates with the creation of an action plan to overcome bias in themselves and others. So it starts to get into that action orientation mode. As mentioned earlier, there's the full online modular course. And then this topic is also available in our video-based course. We include image descriptions, closed captions in English and Arabic in all the videos, and hopefully some more languages to come soon. And then also in the video-based course, American Sign Language, just ensuring that our programs are as accessible as possible. And finally, with action planning fresh in their minds, the final element of the string is the Videos for Change Challenge. So this real world application allows students to take their newfound knowledge about this and put it into practice by creating a video. Students learn about video pre and post-production and understand how their videos can be an incredible tool to bring about positive change in society. And they can also participate in the Videos for Change competition, which allows them to further showcase their work to a larger community.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both Nicole and Cora, for sharing a little bit more about our string, and it's really wonderful grounding for our conversation now on overcoming bias. Really also a great resource. The string is available on Composer, and as Cora Lee mentioned, includes a paid workshop by High Resolves, but there are many more options to swap out that element and pick whichever you like. So now we will turn to our discussion. So I'll just pose a few questions to you all, and just feel free to jump in wherever you like, and we'll explore this topic together. So I'll start with, what are your reflections on this string, and what do you think will be the takeaways and impacts for students?
I'm happy to jump in on that one. I won't get Nicole and Coralie to reflect on the string that they built. They've done a lot of reflection in putting it together. It's I think it's such a great string to address the topic of how to overcome bias. I love that it's got the introductory session at the start before the peak experience, just to introduce some of the concepts before you go right into that High Resolves workshop or a more in-depth film or documentary viewing, and then discussion around that. So I think that is a really nice way to start. and then to have the packaged up sequence in the middle by Global Nomads Group, I think gives students an opportunity to reflect on what they've done in those first couple of sessions and the peak experience, and look at that from a few different angles. It gives them a great opportunity to, it may be that somebody has their aha moment really early on in the string, potentially even in that first repeated practice session. It may be that it happens in identity and purpose, or it might be, that comes later down the piece. So I just love the way that has been put together to build on everything that comes before it, leading up to the videos to change bit at the end, which gives them an opportunity to do something with all of that knowledge. So yeah, I think it's a great way to start this conversation. Thanks for putting it together.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Thanks, Chad. That it's a great string that, from kind of the flow of it, really allows, I think, students to really harness self-agency. And it also allows for all different kinds of learners. So you've got all different kinds of mediums, photography and film and different kinds of reflection and dialogue. So those, I think, are the tools that are needed to kind of dive into this subject matter. So for me, I think it's really the self-agency that I think is the most important quality, first from this topic and theme, but also what's going to be needed for students as they kind of take this out into the world.
That's wonderful. Thank you both. I'll go ahead and move on to the next. So we've done a wonderful job of setting the stage for, how important this topic is. But both bias and global citizenship are, they're very critical, but they're also very broad topics, and maybe overwhelming on how to approach. So what advice would you give to educators on where or how to begin?
Well, I'll jump in, since the Global Oneness Project is the first on the string. Makes sense. Well, first, I just want to say, Nicole, I like how you described how that component of ours is really a case study. And it's actually a great way to describe the resources that we provide. I'll just talk for a second about photography, because what is included in this string is the lesson plan. And within that lesson plan, you link to a photo essay that, as Nicole described, is about documenting different people that live in New York City. The reason I think photography is a great way to begin is because, well, one, I just would recommend starting with a single photograph in that photo essay. And the reason for that is that when you examine a single photograph, as we all know, photography is subjective. So students are going to see something completely different. And so students can work in pairs or small groups. And one strategy that we like to use as well is Project Zero's visible thinking strategy, asking the 3 simple questions, what do you see? What makes you say that? And what do you wonder? It's a great beginning to have a conversation before going deeper into these more complex issues that the string goes into. And it also allows students to share their perspectives with each other. And I've done this with teachers and students, this exercise with the photography. And it's pretty incredible to see what really transpires, because teachers and students all the time share their personal stories that come from these questions and examining a single photograph. And 9 times out of 10, you're also going to have most people share powerful observations about the world as well, because that's all connected.
And I think in terms of global citizenship, that, both are very broad topics, but starting with overcoming bias and understanding the concept of bias can further understand how we're all so interconnected and our actions have such a ripple effect. And there's a reason that we believe certain things or have biases. And so understanding the concept understanding how, different ways and strategies to acknowledge when you have a bias will only help, build stronger relationships among people, and then also just better support how you can be a strong and supportive global citizen in the world.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe jump off a little bit on what you shared, Nicole, about students really being able to understand how bias operates. I think what I've witnessed in the peak experience on identity and purpose is having students really have a moment to see themselves, right? And the components that make up who they are is such a great starting point for them to understand how it may operate with other people as well. So operate internally and externally. And so one component of identity and purpose is an activity on identity maps. And it really helps to break down a very complex issue around intersectionality. What are all of the pieces that make us who we are? How do they interact and how do they intersect? And how do we navigate those pieces, those elements in our lifetime? In our day. And what is the difference between how we see ourselves and how we think others see us as well? So there's this dimensional quality to identity maps that allow students to think about their interior landscape. Like, what are the pieces that make up who I am? How do other people perceive me? Are there things that are below the surface, or are there things that are discernible that may allow people to make suppositions about who I am? So it's a really complex kind of modeling. And I think it kind of connects to this piece around scaffolding, Nicole. You can do this with a group of students who are 6th grade, 12 years old, just get into gender, or I play sports, or what are my hobbies, or the languages I speak, and take it up to students who are, in doing graduate work to think about what are the elements that we put forward in our day-to-day, or what are some of the pieces that we perhaps kind of keep on the back burner. How do we navigate our spaces with our own identities, right? And so I think that that's a really important piece. One other thing to add is in our workshops, that impact measurement piece is really important as well. And so students have an opportunity to take a survey and talk about whether or not they feel like they've gained capacity to understand bias, to apply some kind of tactical efforts to overcoming it. And I think there's a really nice opportunity in developing a string to go through it in a linear manner, but to kind of flip-flop a little bit, right? Let's go back to Global Nomads Group, where you give students those tactical options around how you actually do this. Let's travel a little bit amongst this string so we can build on what we've learned, go back and say, wow, I've learned some more now. How do I contend with what I learned maybe earlier in the string as well? So there's a nice opportunity to really see how the lessons kind of reinforce the learning in non-linear ways.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for such great insights. I'll move on to our next question. What do bias and global citizenship mean to you and your organization, and how at your organizations do you approach these topics when you're creating the content?
Look, I think at Videos to Change sits under the High Resolves group. So the workshops that Coralie runs, often lead into the Videos to Change project. So, the opportunity to practice those global citizenship skills, I think is really critical and comes throughout the entire string. Addressing bias at Videos to Change. As I mentioned earlier, we ask students to create a 1-minute video about any social issue that they're passionate about. we get lots and lots of videos that include biased attitudes. Lots of social issues come with biased attitudes associated with them. So giving students the opportunity to have their voice heard, to not, I think we need to be really careful not to tell students what to think. We need to encourage them, give them the skills on how to think, how to think for themselves, how to come up with an idea that they want to express. So when they identify a biased attitude, either within themselves, throughout the string, they're going to have all of these moments where they go, God, I didn't realize that I held that biased attitude. I didn't realize that, that existed within my community or within my family or my friendship group, So approaching it and giving them the opportunity to have those realizations throughout the string, I think is really, really important. Without telling, that's much more powerful than saying, look at this example, that's a biased attitude. If students can come to that realization for themselves, I think that's a really powerful thing. So we at both High Resolves, and Coralie, I don't want to speak on behalf of you, but having run some of the workshops as well at both High Resolves and Videos for Change, we're really trying to give the students the opportunity to have those realizations for themselves, both around general global citizenship topics, but specifically in regards to biased attitudes. And I think one of the keys to doing that is being vulnerable as educators, vulnerable and open as educators ourselves, and having students realize that this is normal. It is next to impossible, I would say impossible, to not hold biased attitudes. So normalizing it in a way that doesn't make it okay, but makes it okay to acknowledge it, and and that often happens through storytelling. When I've run these workshops before, I've told stories about instances where I've realized, sometimes after years, that I've held a biased attitude that I didn't even realize that I had. And they can be really simple and seemingly harmless, but what Coralie was talking about with the pyramid of hate earlier in the identity and purpose workshop, we're sort of giving the students the tools to understand that those seemingly harmless biased attitudes can lead to much more dangerous things as we sort of go up that pyramid. So that's how we like to approach it, to give students the opportunity to have those realizations for themselves.
Yeah, and I like what you said, Chad, about, when you mentioned normalizing it and then understanding it going there. And that's kind of what we do at Global Nomads Group. Is all of our courses start at the individual level and have students kind of explore the topic there first before moving to exploring that topic from the local lens, global lens, and then culminating in the creation of an action plan. And so that's how we started our course. The interns first said, let's take a real life example and have students consider a time when they made an assumption about someone based on information they chose to focus on, and then later realized that was wrong. And that's when we start to introduce the ladder of inference, which helps understand how biases are formed. And I remember when our interns first, saw the ladder of inference, they were like, this is great, except it took me so long to understand this. Like, there's no way we can show this diagram to middle schoolers, high schoolers, college students, whatever, and think they're going to get it in a second. So they created a video where they're side by side, each representing two different perspectives, looking at a dog. And the dog happened to be, the breed was a pit bull. And then from there, they, this is the pool of data that they have to choose from, and they go up the ladder and identify, one person says, that dog, it looks so cute, I can't wait to play with it. And the other is, this is an incredibly scary dog, it almost seems like it's growling. And as they go through, they take the data, they select one bit of, information, then they start to form beliefs around that, then their beliefs start to form their actions, and then they take action. And it really goes through, how biases are formed. So it's normal that we all have biases, but this is how they're formed. So you start to understand why, and then acknowledge them. And then you can move further on and take action and just learn strategies of unlearning bias, what you see in the media every day, what you've been told, influences from your parents or teachers, your community, the global community, and kind of go from there.
And I wanted to go back to something that you said, Chad, about being vulnerable, which is something that came up in a lot of the work that we've done, especially last year in 2020. And I'll never forget a story a teacher told me during the time that Derek Chauvin was convicted for the murder of George Floyd in Minnesota. A lot of teachers were wanting to really get in the classroom and share this. And I think that was very courageous and very important to do that. But what was interesting is he wasn't prepared for kind of what came up, which was kind of a vulnerability and some trauma that some students were experiencing from that moment. So I just thought to mention that, because if we're talking about bias, I know that there's this part of humanity that's really challenging to deal with. It kind of opens wounds, and there's other complex issues that come up. And, you know, Resmaa Menakem is a writer and author who has explored this. If you don't know his work, that he really does talk about bias and in that way, which is quite beautiful. And also the Greater Good Science Center also has some great resources on understanding the science of bias. But I just thought that that is an interesting piece to the puzzle that is important to add to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Clary. Yes, and thank you everyone for your thoughts. You know, we all sort of touched too on this topic of virtual and digital. I know, Corley, you mentioned the different versions of the high resolve content and you know, incorporating video, photos. So my next question is, how might approaches to overcoming bias and examining bias with students be different for virtual versus digital, virtual digital versus in-person teaching and mediums and tools that you might be using? I think maybe Corley, if not to put you on the spot, but if you'd like to speak to the different forms of the high resolves content, and so maybe what you've seen in the difference of student experience in these difficult topics and complex conversations.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think, you know, many of us over this past year have had to be innovative and creative in the ways that we engage the stakeholders we connect to, whether or not it's educators or youth. Prior to working at High Resolves, I was actually working at an organization that made apps for post-secondary students. And I think the mantra there was really about meeting students where they are. And so young people, many young people are digital natives, while we also have to acknowledge that many young people don't have access to the digital tools that are incredibly important and kind of shaping the ways in which we navigate the world around us at this time. But it's been really interesting using remote ways and digital means to connect with students, and it's provided some interesting and surprising insights around connecting with students in different ways, and the ways in which the methodology will impact the engagement. So for instance, using Zoom to connect with students, there definitely is Zoom fatigue, and students, you know, sitting excessively in front of screens and laptops. That is, it's a tricky element as a facilitator when you are trying to bring joy and energy into space and you see a bunch of blank screens, blank little boxes in front of you. It can be somewhat demoralizing, but you've really got to push beyond that. Imagine the shining faces behind the blank boxes. But I think what I found really encouraging, despite what would seem like the visual non-engagement, is the chat. So students, you know, you throw a question out there and maybe you've got to let the silence sit for a little bit, but students were very engaged in the ways that are germane to social media engagement, right? And so in a way, it almost democratized engagement in a way that in-person workshops don't allow for. So you have a few students who are very extroverted, very comfortable raising their hand, sharing their insights, as opposed to the digital engagement where you may have a slew of students sharing on the chat, right? And so in a way, it allowed us to get more diverse perspectives from students. It lowered the barrier for participation. Sometimes it was just an emoji reaction. Sometimes it was just a +1 or a thumbs up, but we were getting that feedback. And I think, as an educator, that vulnerability speaks to not only, being open for ourselves and sharing our own kind of journey where we're at in this practice, but also thinking about the ways that we engage our stakeholders and meeting them where they're at, and receiving what we're getting, right? And that students are looking for ways to communicate with us, but we really have to be in tuned and open to receiving it. It may not be, hands raised, videos on, a long soliloquy, but that active chat box, that emoji, like there's meaning in that as well. And so I think for myself, what I am very mindful of in delivering workshops is really thinking about the method of delivery and connecting with educator partners to think about where your students at, what's going on in their lives, in your school community. How can we leverage what's happening, whether or not we're doing something in person or digitally, and really meeting them where they're at and designing the engagement for the method. So if it is digital, let's use digital ways to engage. Let's use a Mentimeter, a poll. Let's allow multiple opportunities for digital feedback and reciprocity. If it's in person, how can we move people around? How can we form small groups? How can we use our bodies and engage physicality in that? And so really being mindful of what we have available to us and engage that in the process of the learning.
Thank you so much, Corley. That was beautifully said. Given the time, I'd just like to pause and see if there's any questions. We haven't had any open questions in Q&A so far, but just want to open it up to attendees. If you have a question for our panelists, feel free to drop it in. While we're waiting for a moment, I guess any last thoughts from our panelists on just general advice, any other reflections on string, or your tips perhaps for implementing your content or your elements?
While we wait for questions to come in, one of the things that I would recommend, or a tip, is to take the string and the content and make sure you make it applicable to your students. It's I don't think any of these elements are designed to do exactly this, then exactly that, all across the board. So I don't want to speak on behalf of any of the other providers, but I think it would be advisable to take and say, is this going to work in this format with this exact structure for my students? If it's not, then feel free to make tweaks that are going to make, the learning outcome at the end of the day is the important thing. So if you need to make some small adjustments to how you go about things, I think there's sometimes a tendency to think somebody has prepared this and they need to do it exactly as it was prepared. And there'll be certain things that are important to do as they are written or as they're described, but then I think there'll also be time for you to make modifications to make sure that it's applicable to the group of students that you're working with.
And I would just add, I mentioned the Greater Good Science Center earlier, but they define empathy as the first step of compassionate action. And so I feel like this string does a great job of providing opportunities to foster empathy, building on these student and peer relationships in various ways and ways to take action. And then I love this particular quote from W.E. Du Bois, who says that children learn more from what you are than what you teach, which I think when we think about bias is really essential.
That's
And I
lo-
would just, oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to, I do want to give space for you to answer, Nicole, but also want to address the question. Thank you, Cliff, for your question. So he says, how do you address those students who are resistant to embracing differences, along with the idea that we all have implicit biases? That's a really great question.
I love what Resma Minikin would say to that. And he would answer to start by just acknowledging the uncomfortableness that this work is really uncomfortable. And so it's acknowledging that and kind of sitting with that. And as Coralie, as you mentioned, getting in your body. And that's something that he also talks about, that this is kind of living and breathing in our bodies. And we need to be conscious of where those places are, where things are getting stuck, and kind of trying to have great conversations like the string does to kind of move us through those.
I would also say too, on top of that, is that it's a messy process, and it's also unlearning anything is incredibly difficult, and you build up bias years and years and from so many different influences. And so just acknowledging that this is not something that can be done in an hour, a class, a day, a week, a month. And it's a constant process that even if you have, are able to acknowledge it and have gone through all the resources that Composer has on overcoming bias and our string, there's still more that you could be doing and learning. And so actually what I was going to say too earlier is that we use storytelling that's really rooted in our programs. And, research has been done that so you relate more to stories. You remember stories more than facts. And so I think also giving space for students to share their story, or even just think about their story, opens up opportunity for them to say, okay, this is a lived experience. This isn't just something that you're sharing, out at me. It's not just some fact that I read in a textbook. And we do that through the global peer story. So furthermore, it's someone who, it's a near peer, someone who is potentially on the other world, but within the same age group and probably similar experiences. And now you're hearing their story about bias and saying, okay, don't agree with that, but I'm now acknowledging it. You have a base, you have a platform now to work with.
And Jacqueline, was really quick. I saw you might have been monitoring the Q&A. There's just a question in the chat from Maureen about whether we see the string being applicable to other ages outside of grades 9 to 12. And I think that goes back to my point a little earlier about adapting it for the group that you're working with. So I think this string is absolutely applicable to other age groups. It will just be a matter of figuring out do we need to make some adaptations, do some scaffolding to make sure that it's applicable to them. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that, Chad. So I know we're at time. I want to be mindful of time. So thank you to our panelists so much. Thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your thoughts and reflections and engaging with us in this discussion. If you would like to explore Composer, explore the string you saw today, explore the content from these four fantastic organizations, but also loads others, please sign up for Composer. It is completely free to make an account and sign up. Our website is composereducation.org. If you have any questions or you have any difficulty, you can also reach out to us at our support line, which I will just put here in the chat, support at composereducation.org as well. And thank you so much for joining us. And we'll stick around maybe for another 2 or 3 minutes if there are any other lingering questions. Thank you.